Chosen one. You're not here by accident. You didn't stumble into this moment. You were built for it. Every setback, every doubt, every time they overlooked you, it all prepared you for right now. You're not just watching greatness happen. You are the greatness they never saw coming. This isn't about fitting in or playing small. This is about owning your presence, walking like you belong, and knowing deep down you were never the background. You're the breakthrough. So if something inside you's been stirring, if you've been feeling that quiet fire rising, trust it. That's not ego. That's calling. And when you walk into the room with truth in your stride and purpose in your chest, everything that used to intimidate you starts to shrink. Because you don't follow the light, you carry it. This is your moment. This is your reminder. You're not next. You're now. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them wonder how you did it. Just know, you're not here to ask for space. You're here to take up all of it. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. Here's the truth hidden in plain sight. Influence is rarely earned through mastery. It's granted through visibility. The ones put on pedestals often arrive not with merit, but with attention. But once someone truly grounded steps into view, that illusion of dominance evaporates like fog under bright studio lights. No theatrics, no noise, just precision in motion, wrapped in calm, composed elegance. It's not even a contest. It's a quiet reckoning. Those watching can't tell if they should applaud or stay still out of respect, because what they're witnessing isn't just success, it's disruption with style. What crumbles isn't a person, it's the myth around them. That carefully crafted figure, propped up by endless applause and curated image, begins to flicker under the weight of unshakable presence. They weren't untouchable, they were just uninterrupted. Until now. Their name used to command silence, like a ritual. Their steps awaited like prophecy. But then, without a warning shot, the room feels different. Not louder, just realer. The praise once echoing for them dulls to a hush. You don't confront them, you collapse the illusion. The praise wasn't for excellence, it was for performance. And that's where everything shifts. Because when someone arrives who doesn't need to convince, only to exist, the entire structure wobbles. Not through chaos, but through contrast. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. They were used to being the fixed point, the one others revolved around. But the moment genuine force enters, one that doesn't ask for validation, one that doesn't beg for the spotlight but becomes the gravity itself, the spotlight feels like a prop, and everyone watching begins to realize they weren't witnessing greatness before. They were just watching the best framed picture. The difference now, the frame isn't needed. This isn't about dethroning anyone. It's about revealing there was never a real throne to begin with. Just a well-lit seat, waiting for someone who didn't need it. What's happening isn't conquest, it's correction. There's no chase, no hunger to dethrone, no eyes on recognition, no footsteps behind someone else's path. The intent isn't to outdo or replace, but to dismantle the illusion that certain roles belong to those best dressed in borrowed significance. The admiration built around surface-level achievement begins to fracture when a presence enters that doesn't need glitter to command attention. The showy mask worn by the so-called lead begins to feel like theater once something rooted walks in. Silent, intact, undeniable. No announcement needed. No grand gestures. Just a shift in atmosphere that people can't quite name but can't ignore either. Where others rely on the repetition of their crafted image, this is different. It moves with internal clarity. The shift doesn't come through competition, but through contrast. No effort made to pull a spotlight. It simply turns on its own. And in that brightness, the once celebrated narrative looks thinner. You don't speak against it. Don't tear it down. It falls on its own, under the weight of authenticity. The curtain lifts not because anyone tugs it, but because truth doesn't need a stage. It walks where it wants, and everything false follows gravity. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. That once unshakable figure, kept upright by attention and applause, begins to tremble when reminded of what genuine looks like. The room doesn't erupt, it recalibrates. Applause doesn't stop, it shifts direction. The crowd isn't hostile, it's waking up. This isn't sabotage, it's symmetry returning. The illusion wasn't broken. It simply couldn't stand next to something real. There's no fight for control, no mission to prove worth. The disruption happens without effort, because the real never asks for permission to be seen. It just shows up and quietly reminds everyone what they forgot they were waiting for. They operate off echo, off being heard loud enough and often enough to seem permanent. But what enters now isn't echo, it's essence. Their advantage is built from audience. This force is forged from silence, trials, and depth they've never had to carry. The difference isn't who's louder, it's who's lasting. Where they lean into visibility, this moves from clarity. No slogans, no campaigns, just undeniable presence that rearranges the energy of the room. They sparkle, this strikes. They strategize, this simply arrives. No branding can compensate for the absence of real weight. When the two energies stand side by side, it becomes too clear to ignore. What seemed untouchable looks scripted. What wasn't even trying becomes the standard. The stage was never the point. It was always about what stands when the lights go off. And when that moment comes, only one remains lit from within. It's not ambition that drives this motion. It's restoration, not a reaction, but a return to clarity. There's no need to claim dominance, no craving to surpass anyone. This isn't a performance, it's a correction. The purpose isn't to be louder, but to redirect the focus from a distorted frame back to what's real. Somewhere along the way, the symbols became the substance, and now people cheer for reflections instead of reality. But when clarity steps into the scene, the distortion starts to melt. Not with noise, but with undeniable presence. There's no hunger for recognition, no grasping for hierarchy. That confuses those built on approval. They're used to performers, not witnesses. They read quiet as timid, grounded as unsure. But this stillness listens longer, sees sharper, and moves only when it's time. And when it does, the motion is sharp, not reactive, but intentional. It doesn't aim to dismantle a person, but to remove the script that's kept them inflated. It's not spectacle, it's alignment. And that alone shifts the atmosphere. Applause dims, assumptions fade, and people start piecing together just how far from the truth they've been led. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. What lands here isn't louder, it's heavier. Not with ego, but with certainty. There's no fight, only the quiet unfurling of what was always there beneath the noise. They mistake the silence for strategy, the restraint for hesitation. But this isn't a tactic, It's timing. When the move happens, it's without effort, but with full effect. The shift doesn't echo, it resonates, and the story changes without a word being rewritten. It's not about taking anything, it's about returning everything to its rightful place. That spotlight they thought was theirs, it was only rented. Now it's home. What unfolds here isn't fueled by effort, it's guided by essence. There's no script, no late-night rehearsal, no checklist of impressions to hit. While others are busy stitching together borrowed patterns to seem powerful, this is stitched from origin, unfiltered, unshaped, already whole. That contrast becomes impossible to unsee. They project influence. This is influence. They're rehearsed, this is lived. And the difference doesn't scream, it pulses, steady and irreversible. Their movements are calculated, performances memorized, like lines in a play. But this isn't performance, it's presence. While they lean into borrowed gestures of strength, this enters with no attempt, yet carries more weight. Their crafted confidence looks thinner beside something untouched by approval. No need to chase attention when gravity does the talking. There's nothing exaggerated, nothing inflated, just depth that speaks in stillness. And that's why it lands different. Not because it's bigger, but because it's real. They stretch, they strain, they shapeshift under pressure to look like the ideal. Meanwhile, this glides, not from ease, but from having nothing to prove. No act, no chase, just reality walking into a space built on illusions. And when that happens, every polished image next to it begins to flicker. Not because anyone tried to expose them, but because the contrast does the work on its own. Power isn't always announced. It's felt, quietly and completely. There's no noise, no declaration, no search for reaction. The impact lands without spectacle, and that's precisely what unnerves them. While they flood conversations, chase narratives, and crowd timelines with coded cries for attention, you remain still, steady, and sovereign. There are no captions, no explanations, no staged moments begging for applause, just action, delivered sharply, without drama. And that silence, it isn't emptiness, it's conclusion. It doesn't ask to be noticed, it demands acknowledgement by simply existing. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. What disturbs them isn't just the loss, it's the way you don't need to gloat. You never sought eyes, you walked in with weight. The kind of weight that doesn't need approval to validate it. They scramble not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. Their control unraveling, not from confrontation, but from being overshadowed without a single move to provoke it. The silence after your win echoes louder than their entire effort, and the stillness they once mistook for indifference now becomes the very thing that exposes the imbalance they stood on. Panic sets in. They rush to edit the story, rush to soften the shift. Whisper campaigns, sudden interviews, over-explanations, anything to make the truth more palatable. But the room already shifted. The atmosphere already changed. And there's no reset button strong enough to reverse that kind of clarity. They're not responding to you. They're reacting to their own unraveling. Because while you kept your hands clean, the difference revealed itself without assistance. You didn't need to point fingers. You didn't have to tear anyone down. You became the mirror. and their discomfort did the rest. That's the kind of influence that doesn't chase spotlight, but dims everything inauthentic around it. They shout louder, not from strength, but from fear of being ignored. They turn frantic, not because of defeat, but because the silence surrounding your presence makes their noise feel hollow. And no matter how loud they get, the truth already moved the room. Without a headline, without a warning, without a word. They're always mapping the usual threats, locked in tunnel vision, calculating every step for familiar contenders. Their entire playbook revolves around the predictable, the seen, the familiar. And that's why they never account for what doesn't follow the script. You don't match their expectations, and that makes you invisible until it's far too late. They were tracking storms, and you arrived like a silent shift in gravity. No build-up, no alarms, just presence, decisive and irreversible. They didn't train for you because you weren't broadcasted, weren't name-dropped, weren't in the forecast. You were never trying to be a contender. They just assumed anyone not echoing the noise wasn't even in the room. But you don't enter with noise. You enter with alignment. And that's why, when it happens, when everything shifts, they don't know where it came from. You weren't designed to challenge their order. You were sent to rewrite the system they thought they ran. Not loud, just deliberate. And when it unfolds, their foundation doesn't crack, it folds. What unsettles them most is how natural you make it look. While they trained to defend a throne, you never acknowledged it. They were guarding territory you weren't even walking toward. But then there you are, unbothered, untethered, unmoved, and everything they built starts slipping. Their structure wasn't ready for someone operating from a different blueprint. You don't escalate, you evolve. You don't provoke, you shift. And in doing so, you become the disruption no one prepared for, especially them. What they believed was a fallback moment turns out to be your emergence. They thought decline meant silence. They assumed if they ever stumbled, the momentum would freeze. What they didn't expect was something rising they never considered. Not a mirror of their image, not a mimic of their formula, but something they can't rehearse for. Presence. You weren't circling their spotlight. You were orbiting something entirely different. And when the light hit, it wasn't borrowed. It was yours. This isn't about replacing a figure. It's about reshaping the entire rhythm. Not because you shout louder, but because your motion creates resonance. You didn't fill a gap. They weren't a gap to begin with. You created a new focal point. The attention moves not because you chase it, but because you command it without force. Your rhythm becomes the new pace, and everything that once held the room starts to dim in comparison. Not out of disrespect, but out of clarity. They used to be the center, the reference point. But once you stepped in with unshakable flow, everything else started to feel dated. Their spark flickers next to something not pretending to be lit. You didn't seek any of it, but your alignment made it inevitable. No speech, no entrance act, just purpose, stepping forward and shifting what people thought was permanent. Now their worry isn't just about falling, it's about being forgotten. Not because someone fought to erase them, but because something real finally gave people a reason to look elsewhere. You didn't take over. You became what they thought they were. And now, they're not just facing replacement, they're facing revelation. They've mastered the stage, perfected the optics, built an entire framework on polished presentation. But none of it prepares them for what happens when something unfiltered walks in. What unfolds isn't just a disruption, it's a revelation. The system, the structure, the very way people measure greatness starts to shift. Not because someone shouted louder or played dirtier, but because something rooted stepped forward and showed how shallow the setup really is. The lights don't flicker, but perception does. Suddenly, all the curated images and pre-approved personas feel like decorations on an empty box. It's not a confrontation, it's a contrast. The entire illusion doesn't shatter in noise, but fades in clarity. People start realizing what they applauded wasn't depth, it was design. They weren't celebrating substance, they were seduced by shine. And once something authentic shows up, there's no going back. What once looked aspirational now looks manufactured. The truth doesn't have to knock, it just shows up and makes everything built on surface start to sink. No entourage, no media push, no narrative engineering, just quiet authority forged in places too real to glamorize. There's no script here, no commercial shine, only the kind of power that doesn't need a platform to validate it. The difference isn't in volume, it's in vibration. What they perform, you embody. And that unsettles them because they can't replicate it, can't rehearse it, can't spin it into trend. They spent so long crafting image, they forgot how to carry weight. Now beside something real, their projection looks pixelated. They don't lose to you, they lose to the truth you represent. You didn't try to upstage them, yet their light dims next to presence that doesn't flicker. They can't compete with what wasn't trying to be noticed in the first place. And once people catch that contrast, the shift is irreversible. That moment isn't about a personal victory, it's a collective awakening. It questions everything the crowd's been trained to value. That's not just disruption, that's exposure. And they don't just fall short, they fall inward. Not because someone called them out, but because someone walked in whole. Your calm doesn't accuse, but it shows. And in that showing, the borrowed layers start peeling. It's not about taking them down. It's about showing what never held weight to begin with. What collapses isn't a person, it's the scaffolding built around them. Where their identity leans on being celebrated, yours isn't waiting for anyone to clap. You didn't rise through popularity, you rose through process. They chased visibility, you carried presence. And when the two stand side by side, the tension isn't between people, it's between reality and performance. That's why it all unravels. They're not just responding to being outperformed. They're reacting to the realization that who they pretended to be no longer holds. The reflection becomes too sharp to blur, and the mask slips on its own. What echoes isn't your success, it's their silence, forced to meet itself. And when the noise dies down, what remains isn't applause, it's accountability. They keep chasing the noise, always reaching for the next spotlight, building their identity on reactions. Every gesture is designed to be seen, every word calculated for maximum engagement. Their worth is tied to response. They're not creating from purpose, but from pressure. The constant cycle of showing up bigger, louder, shinier leaves them drained. It's a loop of craving approval masked as confidence, performance dressed up as passion. But beneath all the shine is the fear of fading if no one claps. Meanwhile, you move with direction, not desperation. You don't enter rooms to entertain. You enter because you were meant to. Every action rooted in clarity. You're not measuring your steps by how many watch. You're measuring by how deeply they matter. And that difference changes everything. There's no need to push, no chase for attention. What you carry isn't performative, it's principled. That's why people pause when you walk in. Because presence backed by purpose doesn't need to be loud to be known. They're exhausted from constantly shaping an image. You're steady because you don't wear one. They script themselves to stay relevant. You stay anchored by just being real. What they call effortless in you is actually just peace from no longer performing. You're not mimicking power, you're living it. You don't have to prove you belong. You simply act like someone who never needed permission to begin with. And that disrupts more than any noise ever could. While they monitor feedback to feel secure, you trust your direction. Their strength comes from being liked. Yours, from being aligned. You don't pause to perform. You move to fulfill. And that grace, smooth, centered, certain, makes everything around you adjust. Not because you take up space, but because you own yours. What they don't realize is you never needed their claps. Your assignment came with its own confirmation. They arrived with an agenda. You came with a knowing. They trained for accolades, mapped out tactics, obsessed over angles. You didn't show up to outdo, you showed up to complete. That's the disruption they don't expect. While they fight for position, you're following instruction. Their focus stays on optics, yours remains on outcome. You don't act like someone who hopes to win. You carry yourself like someone already aware the ground's been cleared in advance. Their energy is built on competition. Yours is born from conviction. And when those forces collide, it doesn't matter how sharp their plan is. It can't override what was already set in motion. They call it coincidence, but you know better. The alignment, the timing, the way everything shifts in your favor, none of it random. You're not here for reaction. You're here to activate something that's already been waiting on your arrival. So when their polished preparation falls short, it's not because they didn't try, it's because they never stood a chance against something they couldn't anticipate. Someone who didn't come to compete, but to confirm. You're not a surprise win. You're the result of what was promised. They thought they'd be challenged. Instead, they're watching a plan unfold that had nothing to do with them in the first place.